Well, hello everybody, and thanks for joining us for, gosh, I think this is like the third run at the Prevail webinar series that many of you probably remember when this started. It started when COVID hit a couple years ago, and we came up with this word Prevail because we were all wondering how in the world are we going to prevail? And about 1,500 companies joined us for the first series of Prevail. We talked about a ton of stuff that helped people get through those few months that were a little difficult. And then it evolved to segment 2 of Prevail last year, and here we are at segment 3. So welcome to the webinar series here this time around. We're pretty excited about what we got going today and 1 week from today with the second webinar in this particular series of Prevail. So thanks so much for joining us. My name again is Tim Mush, Director of Business Development here at MarketSharp, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. I've got some great speakers here that are going to help us through the content. So that said, a little bit about the content for these two webinars that we're doing in this series. Today, we're talking about Be Aware and Prepare, Legal and Industry Insight for 2022. And typically in webinars like this, oftentimes we talk about things like lead generation, sales skills, things such as that, and all very important stuff. But we decided this time around to kind of take a little departure from that stuff and talk about some things that are also very important in our industry. Certainly there's some things going on economy-wise that we need to be aware of. There's some things going on as far as legalities that we should be aware of. And that's what we're going to handle in today's webinar. So looking forward to the content we got today. But keep in mind when you registered for a webinar, you're registered for both sessions, both today and next week. And that'll be next Tuesday. And next week, we got Homeowner Insight, Building the Modern Remodeling Experience. And got some great speakers next week. We got Ryan Shantz from Sumo Quote, and we also got Grant Farsworth from the Farsworth Group that just brings a ton of information on really what's going on with consumers, how they buy, and all that kind of stuff. So be sure to join us next week as well. Now, we got a bunch of sponsors that are responsible for making this webinar series happen. Here they are. We got Improvement 360, MarketSharp, RoofSnap, EverConnect, Guild Quality, Socius Marketing, PaySimple, Burnson LLP, Angi, Sumo Quote, and our friends at Hatch. So throughout the webinar, we might give you a little bit of a blurb on each one of these if you don't mind. And then as we wind down the webinar, we'll send you a poll question if you'd like to learn more about the types of services that these sponsors, can provide for you. So keep in mind to support sponsors on things like webinars, because without them, you really can't have these things. They support all the costs involved and things like that. So what I'm going to try to do here is break this up into 3 segments and just give you a little insight on each one of these sponsors. We won't do it all at once. We'll break it into 3 segments during the webinar and make it a little easier for you. So right now, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about MarketSharp. It's an industry-specific CRM for contractors, remodelers, and home improvement professionals, really used to centralize your leads, customers, and all your job information. Kind of an A to Z deal. We also got Improvement 360, enterprise software built for your home improvement business. Effortlessly manage your customer and prospect relations, again, measure performance, and also improve your processes. We also have our friends at RoofSnap. Those of you in the roofing business, you really need to check out what these guys do. And they provide fast and accurate roofing measurements, compelling reports and documents. It's truly a one-stop shop for roofing business needs and everything related to that. And then Angi is also a sponsor of this webinar. I think we're all familiar with the folks at Angi, Angie's List, Home Advisor, and so forth, rebranded Angi recently. And they certainly help you increase your exposure to millions of homeowners looking to find local contractors. So that is the first 4 that we're going to mention here before we get rolling. Again, thanks to them. Again, without them, these webinars don't happen, I should say. Again, my name is Tim Mush. I'm a moderator of today's webinar. Been around the industry for a number of years and helped develop one of the first CRMs in the industry, which is MarketSharp, that many of you use. So enough about that. How about today's speakers? First off, we're going to have D.S. Berenson, Managing Partner at Berenson LLP. He's going to give us some insight of some of the legal issues that are really, really important right now to make sure we got our finger on the pulse of. Then we're going to have Misha Fisher, chief economist at Angi. He's going to give us some information about what's really going on in the economy, how consumers are thinking, how they're acting, and things such as that. So with that, a little information on DS. I guess I've known DS for, gosh, I don't know, 10, 15 years. And he serves as managing partner for Berenson LLP in Washington, D.C. And his firm represents the majority of the top 500 remodelers, maintaining an exclusive national practice in remodeling and home improvement law. His experience includes Office of Chief Counsel of the Internal Revenue Service out of New York City and the Securities and Exchange Commission in Washington, D.C. DS also serves as general counsel and special counsel to home improvement contractors, remodeling industry manufacturers, trade associations, multinational banks, and consumer lenders on a full range of industry matters. So with that, DS, are you with us?
Hopefully so.
You are. Thanks for joining us. Take it away.
Take it away. All right. Well, Tim said that I should discuss the top 3 liabilities in the industry for 2022. And I said, it's roughly a 4 or 5 hour seminar. How long do I have? And he said, you have about 25 minutes. So we're going to go quickly, but hopefully there'll be some takeaways that will help you keep the money you make, because that's really what our goal is here. We're going to be talking about subcontractor labor, 1099 installation labor in the industry, arguably the #1 liability. Some people could say it's telemarketing off of bad lead generation. That's a very complex topic that we won't have time to get into, but the use of independent contractor labor is clearly one of the big problems that the industry has had for the past couple of years, and it's on track to be one of our larger problems in 2022. We're going to talk about contract structuring from 30,000 feet, and also lead paint, which everyone seems to think has gone away, and I assure you it is not. So I think we've got is the first screen up there, Tim? It looks like it is.
It is, yes.
Okay, so let me explain before we get to the screen. What we're talking about, the problem started primarily under the Obama administration. It's moved forward exponentially, took a little bit of a hiatus under Trump, but not too much of one. The utilization of independent contractor labor, which is prevalent in the industry, is a nuclear problem. Can it be done? Yes. Despite all the employment law firms out there and all the accounting firms telling you you can't run 1099 labor, you absolutely can, but it is difficult to do so. And the takeaway I want you to have is, if you're not prepared to build a brick wall around your installer relationships, then you seriously need to convert those installers over to W-2 employees, as expensive as that is. Because if you're not going to do it right, if you're not going to protect yourself, and nobody else is, if you're not going to protect yourself, you're facing a potential nuclear disaster. What do I mean by that? If the installer is up on a ladder doing roofing or windows or whatever your installers are doing for you, and they break an ankle, it doesn't matter that this person is your godfather to your son or your daughter. You've had them over for dinner multiple times. They're going to come after you. They're going to go to the wrong 1-800-SUE-YOU lawyer, and they're going to come after you. And when they come after you, they're going to be seeking the payroll taxes that were never paid at the state level, as if they should have been a W-2 employee, the payroll taxes at the federal level. They're going to be seeking workers' compensation. They're going to be seeking health insurance that they would have gotten if they'd been an employee, perhaps retirement benefits that you give to your employees, a SEP, IRA, 401k, whatever it may be, plus penalties and fines at the state and federal level. And so when you add all that up, including the legal fees, you can never forget the legal fees, you're easily looking at a claim of $100,000 or more for one installer over a year or two. And then they often will go back and try to get their buddies, and they'll try to rig it up into a class action. So it's kind of like a domino effect when you get hit with one of these reclassification attacks. They come in from the IRS, they come in from the Department of Labor, they come in from state wage and hour, and as I indicated, they come in from the installer themselves. So to build that brick wall is a complicated matter. It's not something that we can discuss in 15 or 25 minutes. It's state specific, it's product specific, but let's at least talk about the basic bricks in the wall, what we must have. So when you see on the slide, you first of all have to have a written agreement with your independent contractor installer. And you need to have a written agreement anyway, right? Because you want to have a mechanic lien waiver, maybe you want to have a retention fund holding back a little piece of every job. So when they walk off the job, you've got a little something that you can use to fix up what they've done wrong, et cetera, et cetera. You need to have that written agreement, but it has to explain that this is going to be an independent contract relationship. Without that, if you get audited, if you get attacked, you're pretty much dead in the water. The second brick is that you have to hire these individuals as what we call IBEs, or independent business entities. That means you've got to hire them as a company, corporation, limited liability company. You could even hire them as a sole proprietorship if you wish, but you can't hire and pay them under their own name. You're going to lose if you get attacked, and anybody sees that. They have to be filing their own employer identification number, meaning they have to have registered with the IRS. They must have a separate tax identification number from their social security number. And if they're running as a sole proprietorship, if it's Johnny Jones and he's Jones Installations, okay, he's supposed to have a separate tax identification number anyway. And he must, from our point of view, if you're going to be able to build and protect that brick wall, that relationship. Professional licensing, this is always the most difficult one. We know in about 38 states, our industry is regulated fairly heavily. And if a general contractor is in a state which requires licensing, then the independent contractor installer needs to have licensure. Now in California and Nevada, that's the law. If you're paying an installer on a 1099 basis, they have to be independently licensed. But in any state, they need to be independently licensed if you're going to protect that relationship. Why? It's just a question of logic. If you're arguing that Johnny Jones is truly operating his own business, then Johnny's got to be licensed to operate that business. And if he's not licensed to operate that business, carpet installation, window installation, roofing, whatever it may be, you're not going to win the argument when Johnny comes after you, or the IRS, Department of Labor, or Wage and Hour, or whomever it may be. So you've got to make sure that Johnny's independent business entity is properly licensed. And then we've got pay per job. Pay per job is not difficult. What it basically means is that when you're cutting your check, whether you're paying these guys piece rate or on a commission structure or hourly, whatever it is, you need to designate on the payroll system, on the check, the jobs that they're getting paid for, each particular job. That's it. But you just can't pay them a lump sum as if you were paying an employee. Now, work for others, okay? These days, most of our installers are gainfully employed with us, meaning they're working full-time with us, right? They're not probably working for anyone else. If they are, that's great. They don't actually have to be working for other people, but we need to be able to show that they could be working for other people. So how do we do that? They get a one-page website up, they get business cards, they go into the yellow pages, they advertise. So we can prove that in fact they are holding out their services to others, even if they're really only working for us, okay? Then we have the IRS filing. We have to be paying these guys and issuing them a 1099 miscellaneous form. All right. Now, if they're a corporation, if they're a C corporation, you don't have to do that. That went back and forth under the Trump administration, but you don't have to do that. But for any other type of entity, which again, they must be, you need to file and issue them a 1099 miscellaneous form. And then finally, there's a question of their tax returns. And this is what we call the silver bullet. As Tim indicated, one of my nefarious backgrounds is Office of Chief Counsel of the IRS. So what happens when these guys sue us? Or Wage and Hour comes in and they say, you know what, you owe us $150,000 because Johnny should have been an employee over the past 6 months, 2 years, 3 years, whatever. Okay, Johnny wants a piece of your pie. If we're able to show that we've got a cover page from one of Johnny's independent business entities tax returns, right? So we hired Johnny as a business entity, okay? And we said, you've got to give us the first couple pages or the first page of your tax return. Now we're sitting there across from the 1-800-SUE-YOU lawyer. And Johnny and he are saying, Johnny really was an employee and he was entitled to all these benefits and you owe $150,000. And we can pull out the cover page from the tax return that Johnny gave us for his company, showing that he filed with the federal government, with the IRS, as Jones Installation, and that he took his expenses as deductions. Then we say, well, there's a little bit of a problem here because you're saying that Johnny should have been an employee, but we've got a document here, a submission signed by Johnny to the Internal Revenue Service saying, in fact, he was a business and he took against his taxes business deductions for his expenses. So you can't have it both ways. So either Johnny committed tax fraud and he should have been an employee, or Johnny was never an employee and he didn't commit tax fraud. So I'll pick up the phone and call the district director of the Internal Revenue Service and we'll walk through this right now. And you'd be surprised at how quickly we are able with that strategy to shut down these claims from the installers. But it helps immensely if you've got a copy of the tax return as part of your onboarding procedure. Again, these are just a handful of the bricks that are necessary to build that wall. There are usually 15 or 20 bricks in each state. And again, it's product specific. And some of the bricks are more important than others. I can't tell you how many bricks you can pull out of the wall and still have structural integrity. But I can tell you, if you build the wall properly, we, at least at our firm, have never lost an audit or an attack with proper protocols. So again, the takeaway here is if you're going to run 1099 based installers, understand the risks are substantial, build that wall correctly or don't, and move them to W-2. Otherwise, your exposure is tremendous. Okay, now, none of this brick wall is going to work for sales representatives. There's an entirely different structure we use there. It's called Section 3508 under the Internal Revenue Code that allows you to treat your installers as if your sales reps, as if they were independent contractors. Completely different conversation. I just want to make sure everybody's aware of this. We're talking about installers only here, not sales representatives. Okay, so the second top liability that we've been running into for the past couple of years is essentially contract structuring, our contracts. A lot of our contract paperwork is taken from other remodelers, you know. I'm not sure why, but it is. It's stolen from other remodelers, oftentimes larger players in the industry, because there's an assumption that if they're doing $50 million or $150 million or $400 million, they must know what they're doing. They must have really good documents. And I can tell you that is a false assumption. It's not accurate. So if you're writing hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars on customer-facing paperwork, you really should take the time to make sure that paperwork is not only compliant with federal and state law, but it has the necessary business protections that you want. And there's an endemic failure in our industry to understand this for some reason. And every time we get in front of one of the attorney generals or we get hit in a class action lawsuit by consumers, they pull up the contract. And if there is some defect on that contract, that means that every job that you've written for the past 5 years or 7 years, whatever the statute of limitations might be in your state or states, every job you've written on that paperwork is a bad job. And your entire operation essentially rests on that. So you get up in front of an attorney general or a district attorney, they're looking to run for governor next year. They're looking for something sexy and they want to go after the evil home improvement contractor. And we're making it very, very easy for them because there's going to be some sort of defect in the contract. So we want to remember our industry is governed by both federal law and state law. Again, about 38 states have specific home improvement regulations that govern what can and cannot go into a contract. And federal law does as well. And one of the most basic issues that we have to remember is the right of rescission. If we're selling in the home, we must give a right of rescission. Now, in some of the Northeast states like Connecticut and New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania, we're supposed to be giving the rescission whether we're selling in the home or whether we're selling in a showroom or at an event. It doesn't make any difference. But traditionally, if we're closing in the home, we have to give a right of rescission, and there has to be a notice on the contract talking about the right of rescission, and then there has to be a rescission form. And we have to give 2 copies of that rescission form to every customer. So if I'm selling a new bath remodel job, let's say a liner job, to a husband and wife, they're supposed to get 4 copies of the rescission. If they're life partners, 4 copies of the rescission. If I'm not giving them 4 copies of that rescission in compliance with state and federal law, my contract is defective, and every job I've written is defective. So you want to make sure that you're in compliance with the federal rule that governs that, which is 16 CFR 429, and the state versions. And every state has some version of that rule. They've got some rescission type of rule. And a lot of the states are different. So Rhode Island, Michigan, Florida, California, the language is different than the federal language. Like in Delaware, it has to be in a different color, the notice on your contract. In Michigan, it has to be in a larger font. You have to have all these little nuances correct, or someone's going to argue that your contract and every job you've written under that contract is bad. Okay, so you want to make very sure that you've got basic compliance at the federal and state level of your contract. Don't leave yourself exposed. And it's not just legal compliance. You want all the business protections. There are many, many business protections that are unique to our industry and to the products we're selling. One of the most common right now is, of course, the channel of distribution backlogs that we've been seeing because of COVID. So, Tim, can we bring up, yes, there it is. Okay, so the delays. Now, this is just a concept paragraph, but you want to have delay language in your contract saying basically what? Well, events beyond our control. What are we talking about? Material shortages, financing delays, delays on inspections, permitting, unforeseen structural problems, incorrect pricing by the sales rep, because you know the sales reps are going to screw up the pricing quite a bit. If any of those things happen, it's not going to mean that we're in breach of the contract because there's been a delay. And if any of those things happen and we want to back out of the contract within, say, 30 days, we can do that. Give you back your deposit and get out. So we don't get hit with massive price shortages because, you know, lumber has tripled since we wrote the contract, for example. Okay, so you want to have language like that, but you also want to set your expectations. When we're running a 6 or 8 month backlog on window installs these days, for example, keep in communication with the customer. Let them know what's going on. Send them a box of cookies. Is it hokey? Yes, but we solve so many problems by sending out a $10 box of cookies with a short note. Manage the customer's expectations, but make sure you've got the legal backup with a good delay clause in your contract. Okay, now, third liability issue, lead paint. So I'm going to ask Tim to bring up the lead paint slide, which is our next one. Okay, now we're going to hope that everybody here knows what I'm talking about because a lead paint seminar is a good 2 to 3 hours minimum. Okay, the violation penalty is $37,500 per violation. You screw a job on lead paint, you can be looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars, multiple violations on one job. The Hanson's window operation, a lot of you are familiar with that. That was a $113 million fine by the EPA. It took us 5 years to get them out of that. And we have lead paint audits and litigation going multiple times a year. I don't know why people think this issue has disappeared. I can assure you it has not. Very quickly here, again, on the assumption that most of you know what I'm referring to. If you don't, there's a takeaway, which is you should figure it out. 1, the lead paint information pamphlet has to be delivered on jobs that are working on houses from 1977 and before. Okay, it can be delivered electronically, it can be delivered at time of close, but you need the customer's address as a signature. You have to give them the lead paint pamphlet. You need to verify the age of the house. If the house is from 1978 or later, you don't have to worry about lead paint. But if it's from before 1978, you're supposed to be testing, all right? Unless you can get under one of the Toxic Substances Control Act exemptions, which basically means if you're disturbing less than 6 square feet of paint per room on the inside of the house, or less than 20 square feet of paint on the outside of the house. Those are your exemptions. Then, if you don't have those exemptions and the house is from 1977 or before, you're supposed to be testing for lead paint. And you're supposed to have certified test results, and the customer's supposed to get a copy of those. There's supposed to be a checklist as to how you have then performed the lead safe work practices. That's signed off again by your certified renovator, which is generally your crew chief. Copy goes to the customer. Then you have the clearance testing, again signed off by your certified renovator, again copy to the customer. And of course, your certified renovator needs to be licensed. You're supposed to be licensed as a renovation firm with the EPA, and the crews are supposed to have on-the-job training as well. A huge, complex topic. If none of this is ringing a bell, then I'm going to assume that you're either assuming the risk on lead paint, which is a difficult judgment call to make, but if you're a smaller operator, understand that. Or you know what I'm talking about. You have this all in line. You have all this paperwork. It's a record-keeping structure. Here's what I would point out, though. Because of the channel distribution delays, when we talked about delays a few moments ago over COVID, the delivery of the lead paint informational pamphlet is supposed to be renewed if we don't start the job within 60 days. So we're getting a lot of headaches from the EPA on this, a lot of attacks, because our jobs are getting delayed, obviously, many, many months right now. So if you've given the lead paint pamphlet out at time of sale, and more than 60 days have gone by before we're starting the install, you need to deliver a second pamphlet. Don't set yourself up for that kind of nonsense litigation, okay? Get yourself on a tickler system, get the second pamphlet out when we have backlogs due to COVID. Okay, now we only have a few minutes left. I'm going to ask Tim to bring up one more slide, okay? Because everything we've been talking about, as fun as it is and as exciting as it is, everything can be encapsulated by protecting yourself to some degree with a class action waiver. This is critical. Individual lawsuits can generally be dealt with, but class action is nuclear. And having a class action waiver is more art than science. It depends on what state you're in. Again, this is just a sample. I'm not a big fan of arbitration. I prefer the courtroom as a rule, because if we're suing somebody, it's better and faster and cheaper for us to use the courtroom. If someone's coming after us, though, I want the option, if it's a class action, to move it into arbitration and have it waived as a class action. No jackpot jury awards, no anti-home improvement juries. It's confidential, it's private. This is where we need to be going, which means you need to have some sort of class action waiver with an arbitration clause in your contract if you want to protect yourself. Basically, it's supposed to say that if there's any claim, then at the option of either party, you can move it into arbitration, and the customer's agreeing that they're not going to join a class, they're not going to represent themselves as the representative of a class. Maybe you have a mediation process in there as well. Okay, now it is just as important to put this into your employee handbooks or your employment contracts so that you have a good shot at prohibiting any employees from bringing class action against you. It's critical. So the class action waiver, again, which should be in an arbitration clause, should be in your customer-facing work order, and strongly recommend that it goes into any employment agreements that you've got with your people. You can put it in your installer agreement as well, and you can put it in your sales rep agreement, okay? So with all that fun stuff being said, the takeaway is you can spend all your money generating leads, but you have to understand that there is a target on your back. Our industry is not exactly loved for a variety of reasons. If you're not going to take the steps to protect and keep the money you're making, you shouldn't be in this industry, because it's about a lot more than just lead generation and closing the sale. Don't let these people simply walk off with the money that you make. And on that happy note, I'll turn it back to Tim.
All right. Well, thanks so much, DS. And hopefully you can hang around because some questions came in I want to send your way as we wind down the webinar later. And if you have more questions you'd like us to ask DS, go ahead and put them in the Q&A window, and we will reference them as we get to the Q&A session as we wind down the webinar. So before we get to Misha, a couple things. A little bit more about the sponsors. With DS just having been speaking to us, a little bit about his company. It's made up of attorneys that specialize in unique issues affecting the remodeling and home improvement business. You know, their industry-specific knowledge combined with a high-quality legal representation is why they're their industry's leading legal team. So if you'd like to learn more about DS and the services they have, we'll give you an opportunity later with a poll question to let us know that. Our friends at Guild Quality. Many of you are Guild Quality clients, and many of North America's best home builders, remodelers, contractors, and home service companies rely on Guild Quality's customer satisfaction surveying and performance reporting to help them monitor and improve the work or the quality of their work. So if you're not really checking out your customers after the job, seeing how they're feeling, you're probably missing out on a lot of opportunity to first off learn some things, and secondly have it evolve to online reviews and so forth. Pay Simple. This is a company that helps you with all-in-one payment acceptance, billing, customer management, and things designed for the service-based business. If you haven't checked out what Pay Simple can do for you, you really want to check that out because they can really make getting paid way easier than it can be in many situations. And finally, our friends at Socius Marketing. I think many of you are familiar with Socius. They're home improvement marketing experts. They create custom digital strategies to ensure homeowners will find your business. And what they're really good at is making web strategies that convert. So later on, again, you'll have an opportunity to let us know if you'd like to learn more about those folks. So again, before I get to Misha, one more thing. A couple live events coming up I wanted to make you guys aware of. First off, we got a brand new event. It's called Fast Remodeler Live. And this is an event produced by Qualified Remodeler Magazine. Many of you have attended Qualified Remodeler's Top 500 Live event. They do a great job with events. And the fast part of this means focused on agile systems and technology. This particular event is really one of the first totally technology-oriented events in our industry. And when we see the companies that are really, really growing, large and so forth, and profitable, they're the ones that are really leveraging and embracing technology. So if interested in this event, we'll give you an opportunity to let us know that as well. Our friend Tony Hody, he has a conference every year called LeadCon. And this year, 2022, is going to be in Columbus, Ohio. By the way, the Fast Remodeler event is in Baltimore. But Tony's event is in Columbus. And it's going to be in May, I believe, or yeah, May 26th and 27th. And it's not just going to be on lead generation. It's going to help with lead conversion. It's going to help with helping you get employees to manage all this. I got a great lineup of speakers there, including my friend John Anglis, that many of you know, who does a great job. Rick Grasso also has a growth seminar for owners. And I love the subtitle of this, How to Build a Company to Generate $1 million in income per year for the owner. That's a bunch. And you might think, wow, that's not practical. I'll tell you what it is. There's a lot of people that are doing this, and a lot of them will be at this event sharing how in the world they did it. That's June 16th and 17th at the Crystal City Marriott at Reagan National Airport in Arlington, Virginia. So we're a sponsor of all these events, and we can help you get into these events either free or next to free with subsidized tickets. So if you're interested in any of these events, go ahead and let us know. You can request information and tickets by emailing me directly at tim@marketsharp.com. But I think what I'll do here to make this easy for you is I'm going to send you a quick poll, and you can let us know right now whether you'd like more information on any of these events or if you'd like some comp tickets to go to these events. So I'm going to leave this poll up for just a couple seconds here. So go ahead and click and let us know if you'd like more information on this. And we will get back to you with the information and help you get yourself so you can attend these events either for free or next to free. So let us know here. You can select multiple events if you wish. And I'll leave this up just for a second so you can let us know. I'm going to close the poll probably in about 10 seconds. So quickly go ahead and click and let us know if you're interested in this. And we'll help you out and look forward to seeing many of you at some of these events that are upcoming. You know what I've learned about events lately? I go to a lot of them. And here's what I found. I found there's two different types of companies that respond to events different ways. And when I go to these events, frankly, the people I see at these events over and over and over again are the most successful companies in the country. And you might think, well, why do they have to go to these events? They pretty much got this figured out. And obviously they don't think so, because they're there, their minds are open, and they're learning. Now, the other type of people that get presented with an opportunity to attend an event oftentimes say things like, no, I don't think I can get away from my business. I'm a little too busy to get there. And you know what? That's just asking for trouble. So take the lead from these companies that are the best of the best that find themselves at these events time and time and time again, because they're really leading the way. And there's good reason they're leading the way, because they're out there rubbing shoulders with people that are doing the same thing they're doing. And they're learning from people that really, really know the business inside and out. So last chance, go ahead and click if you're interested in learning more. I'm going to close the poll right about now. So thanks for that. If you requested more information, we'll get back to you and get you that information. So next up, Misha Fisher. Now, Misha is the chief economist for Angi Incorporated, where he leads market research, including customer spending behavior, labor market dynamics, and residential housing trends. And Misha's research and insights have appeared in a wide range of popular and industry press, including the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, Fox, NBC Nightly News, Forbes, Business Insider, and a bunch of others. Now, Misha is also an instructor in applied quantitative, I think I said that right, Misha, I'm not sure, methods and statistics at Northwestern University. And he's also a member of the American Economic Association and National Association for Business Economics. So with that, welcome to the webinar, Misha, and tell us what's going on with the economy.
Thanks, Tim. That was wonderful. So he closed out his presentation talking about make sure that you are earning your money for you, that you don't lose it. And that's a really, really important point and a great segue, because there's more than one way to lose your profits and to lose the benefits of all your hard work. And so what we're going to do is we're going to first run through what's going on with inflation, because that's kind of top of people's minds right now, both inflation and gas prices and what are materials and supply chains doing. And the reason why this is important is that economists nicknamed inflation the cruelest tax. And the reason we say that is because it comes along and takes all the benefits of your hard work without you even realizing that it's been taken. And that can be pretty dangerous to your business. So you have to make sure you're protecting your profit margins. So we're going to run through a couple of really top line important numbers for you to keep in mind that I think will help you protect your profits first and foremost. So Tim, if you want to pop over to the first slide here, and what's going to happen is as we cycle through these slides, we're just going to add a line to this, because I didn't want to give you all of the upfront trends, but as we stack what different things are doing together, you can really get a picture. So what you're looking at here in the red line is the broad-based consumer price index, and that's what people are talking about with inflation. And if you look at the very right-hand side of the graph, you can see certainly inflation is up. That's gotten steeper, and that's important to think about. If you are used to charging X, consumers are now facing a higher price for other goods and services in the market. And maybe you're thinking, okay, well, if the broad-based price inflation is 9%, then that's what the prices I should be raising are. But if Tim, if you want to slide forward just once, just click forward on the slides, we can add a few pieces to this chart. And you can see here, we can see construction services and construction goods. Construction goods are what we tend to think of in terms of the various input pieces to an overall construction project. It can be various pieces of materials, it can be fixtures, fasteners, any of these top line pieces. And then construction services are what, say, if you're a general remodeler or a home builder and you're paying another company to come in and haul away your refuse from your job site, that would be a construction service. And you can see that inflation there is considerably higher, multiples, 3 times roughly on average what it is in the general economy. So first off, what does this mean? It means if you're using 8 or 9% as your heuristic for how you're thinking about inflation, you are running the risk of really losing your profitability insidiously and quietly. And you want to really make sure that you're paying attention to not only what you're charging your customers, but also what you're paying for all of these things, and keep track of individual pieces. So if you have an accounting team or some other part of your business process that keeps track of these things for you, make sure you're looking at what you were paying a year ago or 2 years ago for these things, and make sure that your profit is growing at least staying stable, and make sure that your revenue is going up to make up for these higher cost of inputs. But this isn't the whole story. So Tim, if you want to click forward again, we're going to add another line here. And you can see this is home prices. So home prices are up even further. And this is where some risk comes in for if you have a lot of employees, you have to be thinking about, are they able to buy into their communities and what do wage rates have to do? But also recognize that there's an opportunity in here as well. And the opportunity comes from the fact that if you are a consumer out there looking to buy a house, now is suddenly not a very good time. We had a really, really unique opportunity over the last couple of years where, because interest rates dropped by roughly a third, it was really a good deal to suddenly buy a home, because the long-term 30-year cost of the money to own the home had dropped so much, so people could bid up the starting price by a commensurate amount. But now that those prices have been bid up and interest rates are starting to rise, the overall price of homes has gone up, and all of a sudden a remodel or some other form of construction off an existing structure is a better deal for consumers. And what that better deal means, though, is that your pricing can also reflect that if you're not in the new home construction business. If you primarily deal with residential existing homes, the value that you provide to consumers is proportionally more competitive. And this really leads into sort of a final point, which is about wages. And so, Tim, if you want to click forward, we'll add one final line to this chart. And you can see this is the overall wage rate that people in residential construction are earning. And it's not up very much. It's higher than CPI. So it's, if you look at the red line on the right versus the blue line, you can see we're doing a little bit better than the general population. But if you think about what's going on with the overall environment, people in every single sector aren't earning enough to proportionally make homes cheaper anymore now that the prices have risen. And on top of that, if we're looking to recruit and pull more people into the industry, then there's a really important lesson here for how much your wages have to go up and how much they have to rise to attract and retain people. There's typically a premium pulling people into the construction trades, but that premium is not as high as it used to be, and it might need to be a lot higher. So really start mulling over your wage rates, because everything else is up, wages aren't up as much, and I think that that's another area of risk. And the big takeaway from all of these things is don't be using 8 or 9% as your rule of thumb when you're thinking about how much you might need to raise prices. Really examine all of the different costs of your inputs, because you might find that they're higher than that year over year. So moving on to the next slide, we can see that overall inputs, there's a dramatic story in terms of what the rising prices are doing for different things. So if we're looking at what producers are facing in terms of higher costs for the products they're making, you can see that starting with the pandemic, it shot up for manufacturers of ceramics, plumbing fixtures, and a bunch of other inputs that we use in both remodeling and new home construction. And so you can see that their inflation is considerably higher than that 10% average. You can see that that's much higher. It's multiples of it. Going forward to the next slide, we'll also see it's the same thing with roofing materials, but it's not a common story. So if you look at asphalt shingle roofing, the prices that producers are paying are up roughly 10% from the start of the pandemic. But if you look, the prices that they're facing for manufacturing steel is almost double. And so even within these different categories, you can see that there's different areas. And this is the prices that producers are facing to make their materials. So if you're commonly buying these materials from producers and you haven't noticed prices rise this much so far, recognize that they might eat some of that cost in the short term, but in the long term, they'll pass those costs on to you, and you need to make sure that you are passing that wisdom and knowledge on to your clients and setting expectations for potential price increases. And then also following up on a really important point DS made was are you building in really safe clauses to your contracts to control for these things? Because I don't think we've seen the end of increasing materials prices, because the supply chains remain disrupted, the demand remains high, and producers have not necessarily passed on all the costs that they faced this past year, and they're going to preserve their profits too. So make sure that you are really monitoring that closely. Moving on to the next slide, you can also see this is true with lumber, and the overall price of softwood lumber has gone up considerably. I don't think we're going to see a return to $2 2x4s anytime soon, if ever. That was a very nice benefit of the quiet period of home construction in sort of the mid 2010s. But now that home construction is back up, now that there's so much demand for remodeling, we're facing probably higher prices for the foreseeable future, because the capacity to build out the supply for lumber mills and for transporting these materials is not instantaneous. So if you're looking at 30 or 40% increases in the demand for new home construction, you can't expect necessarily people to increase that much supply within the milling process that quickly. And so this is another area where you want to really be intentional about prices, but then also be intentional about where you're sourcing from as well, because you might have some lumber yards that might not stock anything if the prices rise too much. They might say, I'm too exposed, I don't want to be caught holding the bag if prices drop. But you might have other ones that might hold on to that old inventory and sell it to you at a higher rate. So obviously in periods of high volatility, you want to make sure that you are shopping around and really aware of all of your different options that you have when you're sourcing these materials. And moving on to the next slide, we can also see that this is true with hardwood lumber as well. So it's softwood and hardwood. Obviously, they have very different purposes in terms of home construction, but you can see it's very similar rates of increase. Hardwood's not up as much as softwood, but it's still pretty high. And again, these are producer price indices. So if you've noticed that your producer has not raised the final cost to you as much, recognize that they might just be doing their pricing on a longer term cadence, that they lost some profitability potentially depending on the product line or the cost of the inputs, and that they'll raise those prices proportionally going forward. On to the next slide, Tim, if we can jump into what's going on with labor supply. Moving forward, we can see that the overall shortage worsened by about 10%. This is our Angi metric of how we keep track of labor supply within the marketplace. Year over year, 10% is a pretty big increase in terms of how much the shortage worsened, because we were starting with a really high baseline already. So we'll see what 2022 brings. I expect it will be a similar story where hiring is just very difficult. And there's some really interesting long-term macro fundamentals driving why. So on this next slide, what you can see is the overall construction quits and openings environment. And there's a lot going on here. So Tim, if you just want to click forward twice, what we can do is see that there are a couple, actually let's just do one more click forward, is what these are doing is we're adding the overall view of what the average is like over these different periods of time. So if you look at that first line on the left, the periods of the 2000s was a boom year for home construction. We were building a lot of houses. There was a lot of quits and openings, but that was pretty stable, right? Even though we were booming, people weren't that concerned with the labor supply and how hard it was to retain people. Then if you look at the middle line, you can see that there was that period following the Great Recession where the churn in the labor market was much more stable and even lower than it was in the 2010s, because new home construction had ground to a halt. There wasn't necessarily as much demand for remodeling, and the overall environment was pretty stable. But you can see over on the right-hand side, we are now at something that has never happened before. We're in unprecedented territory in terms of construction openings and in terms of construction quits, and the gap between the two. So right there, you can see how elevated the overall average is over this period of both the pandemic and then even leading up to before the pandemic, as the economy was already strong, in the 2017, 2018 period. And as a result, that's going to put a lot of upward pressure on prices for labor, because there's a lot of demand for it. And this is one of those areas where I'm not quite sure our industry has really quite figured out how important it is to pay competitively over the long term. We tend to have sticky prices and sticky wages in a way that companies that are very, very large employers don't have. Right? If you look at the technology sector or manufacturing, they tend to be larger employers on average than in home services and home improvement, and in all of these other sort of tertiary home industry sectors. And what that means is that we're not always as quick on the ball with raising rates in the same way that we have to, because a larger business is going to be paying closer attention to the actual metrics surrounding wage rates. We still pay a premium. That's good. It's important. We should highlight it. We also have really, really high job satisfaction. Also important, also something we should highlight. But if you look at the premium that you get going into the construction trades, for example, somebody from the services sector can double their hourly wage. That's a great deal, right? They might even be working more too. So they might triple their overall money if they're working more and doubling their hourly wage. But that premium is actually not as big as it used to be, and it might need to be higher than it used to be because some other sectors are now offering people the capacity to work remote and work from anywhere, and they might value that at a few dollars an hour on average. And as a result, it's clear that our wages need to go up in order to attract more people, and that's also something you should be thinking about when you're doing your pricing. If you can't retain the labor to get through a job quickly enough, you might need to be thinking about your pricing and your wage rates in a way that holds people in and reflects that in your overall bids that you're putting to consumers, and also really level set their expectations that this is the environment. We're going to talk about a little bit how rich consumers are. That's great, and they can absorb these prices in a lot of cases, and that's important because our industry also has this other unique quirk where we really get overbooked and people just stop taking new clients in some cases, and that's not the way to run something, because if you look at most other markets, they clear pretty instantaneously. If somebody wants something, you can sell it to them almost instantly. That means that our prices are probably in many cases too low for a lot of jobs. So moving on to the next slide, you can see that we're going to look at that gap specifically, and the gap is at an all-time high. So this is just the difference between the two lines on the last slide, and this is showing us that the overall gap is now at more or less an all-time high, starting with the pandemic. Right on the right, you can see it peaked at almost double, whereas we've been at in many cases, there were more openings there were fewer openings than there were people looking for work, and now it's flipped. So moving on, we're going to now start tackling the consumer angle and what's going on with consumer spending. So jumping into the first slide here on the consumer set, what we can see is there's a big impact that interest rates have on overall home sales. And what we'll look at here specifically is single family home sales and the impact that the 30-year mortgage has on it. The 30-year mortgage was already dropping, if you look at the left-hand half of the chart there, and the single-family home sales were trending upward beforehand. But then right in the center of the graph, you have the onset of COVID. And when that happened, there was that 30% reduction roughly from a baseline right in the center. You can see that it's base marked at 100, and then that red line drops to about 75. And what that means is that there was a 25% reduction in the 30-year mortgage rate. And at that exact same time, you can see the green line shot up because this created this temporary arbitrage opportunity for consumers to buy into the market a cheaper asset with a cheaper price, and that bid up the price of homes. But this had a number of downstream consequences. So the first thing is we created a lot more households in single family homes. The other thing it did was it took everybody who was already in a single family home, and the price of their homes being bid up created more home value, which created more home equity. So we've created trillions of dollars in home equity for people in existing homes. We've also, for a lot of the same people, if they had mortgages, they were able to refinance their mortgages and free up cash flow. So you've got more cash flow, you got more home equity, and you've got more homeowners. And this is why it's really important to stress this importance around pricing, is that consumers are in a really good position right now in terms of households that own homes. Right now, currently this year, not the best time to buy a house because the house prices have risen so much and because now interest rates are starting to rise again. But in terms of anybody who's been in their home for a couple of years, they are certainly going to have a significant amount of unlocked spending power that they otherwise would not have had. Moving on to this next slide. And this is just showing the gap actually. So Tim, if you just want to cycle through to the next slide, we'll get past this. This is just sort of showing the gap between the two as they rose. This is showing the actual growth in the home equity gains that came along. And you can see in green, we've got the 2019 distribution of home values across the country. And in the blue, you can see the 2021 distribution of home values across the country based on the rates of increase we saw in 2019 and 2020 and 2021, which were roughly which was almost a 25% increase if you stack those years on top of each other and look at that compound growth. So that's unlocked a lot of equity, B, it's been a lot of leveraged gains, and C, you can see that growth in the share of homes that are over 500,000 has been pretty considerable, right? You've got almost a third increase in the share of homes that are that valuable, and that's a big deal in terms of consumer spending power and in terms of how rich people feel. And at the same time, also recognize that as interest rates go up, people are going to get locked into those cheap mortgages and might not necessarily try and sell. because even though they get the benefit of the home equity gain, if they were to sell, they'd have to buy back into the market at the higher price. So all of a sudden a remodel becomes significantly more competitive versus to selling and buying another asset. So if we move on to the next slide, on this piece, you can see the actual impact of building on this whole equation that we've been discussing. You can see that total housing has been rising since the 2000s, but it is for the first time now being exceeded by occupied housing. So the gap between the two, the gap between occupied and total, is our vacancy rate. And that is a measure for how much slack there is in the buying market. If you look at the gap between them, you can see we had that peak period in the mid 2000s, like the 2009-2010 period, where the housing market had crashed in the Great Recession, and there was the biggest gap we've seen. But starting in about 2014, that gap started to shrink, and then starting with the pandemic, it changed. So right there on the far right-hand side, you can see for the first time in 20 years, the growth in occupied housing is exceeding the growth in total housing. And that's because the millennial generation is hitting their peak formation of households and careers and home buying and family formation. And that is what is driving this tension of shrinking vacancy within the housing market. And this is, I think, really, really telling that story of how much slack there is in the market and why everybody's so busy and why there's not enough labor to go around. Because we got used to this period in the 2010s where there wasn't that much room, or where there was plenty of room for people to go in and buy vacant houses, and that's evaporated at this stage. Moving on, what we can see is there's also a growing glut of incomplete homes that are coming online, and you can see that the gap on the far right-hand side between starts and completes is growing and has never been greater. Moving on to the next slide, you can actually see the difference between these two lines. So right here, you can see that the gap has been growing over the last 3 years since sort of the onset of the pandemic, and now it's at an all-time high in terms of how many homes are out there incomplete. They've been started and they haven't been finished. And what that's really telling us is that in addition to the total number of homes going up, we've also got a lot of incomplete inventory, and that's a really, really good gauge of how well the supply chains are functioning. So right now, not very well, and that's what we're seeing because people can't complete homes and they can't get the labor to complete homes. So what's this overall telling us, Tim, if we want to jump on here? Right now, the current environment is pretty toxic to somebody who's trying to run their business in a really, really stable way and just do what they've always been doing. You want to really be intentionally thinking about this, but you also want to be planning for the future. And there is a housing replacement super cycle that sort of takes place in terms of replacing the existing homes that have been built. That's not going to happen at an even pace, because if we build a lot of homes all at once, those will have to be replaced more or less all at once because everything tends to age at roughly the same rate. And right now we are running into a very interesting period where we're looking at the replacement super cycle for a lot of outdoor pieces of the home. If you assume a roughly 20 to 25 year replacement rate on well-installed siding and well-installed roofing, we are coming into the period where all of the housing stock that was built in the early 2000s is needing replacement, and that is stacking on top of the existing trend in new home construction. So you can see in the red, that's new home construction, and then just forecasting that out at relatively stable, you can see that we are running into this period where the replacements are also rising, and that gray line is showing us how much overall demand there is for this entire sort of housing universe and what we are running into in terms of both competition for labor and materials. So I think as we're coming up on time, Tim, do we have one more slide, or is this our last one?
This is the last one, Misha.
This is our last one, perfect. So what are the final takeaways from all this stuff? Why are we looking at charts? Charts are not as useful as, here's how to install a roof. But what they can really teach you is right now you're running a business. You want to protect all of your hard work. You want to plan and make the right investments. This is a very volatile period. First and foremost, protect your investments from inflation. We recently polled our Angi network of pros to find out what the impact of gas pricing was having. 95%, more or less unanimous, of pros were running into issues of either noticing the higher gas prices impacting their bottom line or of expecting it to get even worse. Only 3/4, 75%, were actually saying that they might raise their rates as a result of it. So while on the one hand, that's a high number saying that rates are going to be higher, it's not the same. And if you're not planning on raising your rates because your gas prices are going up, you're probably not thinking through all the implications of it. And so really be intentional about that. Also recognize that labor is not going to get cheaper, it's going to get more expensive. That's going to be true for a lot of materials, not uniformly, it depends on the material, but a lot producers are going to continue to pass their rising price on to you. And consumers, at the other hand, are in a really good position by and large. That's not a universal statement, but if you're looking at the upper end of the income spectrum that owns a lot of homes and is going to be doing higher cost remodels, they've got more home equity than they've ever had. They've got cheap interest rates on their existing debt. They've got effectively a negative interest rate on their mortgage because they've got a 2.8, 2.9% mortgage with inflation at 8 or 9%. So overall, the position is very good for them to absorb some of those costs, and you want to make sure that you're protecting your profit. So with that, I think we're at time, and Tim, I think we've got Q&A for DS and myself.
We do. Great stuff. You know, I love the content you both provided, because really the message I'm hearing from it is you really at this stage of the game right now with the current situation we're in, you really need to protect yourself. You know, certainly on the legal side, but also on many of the things that Misha just mentioned. You know, something that I see running rampant in our industry right now is lack of profitability with companies. You know, they think they're making money because the owners are pulling some money out and, you know, and supporting their lifestyle and stuff like that. But I just saw a recent survey from Dave Yoho Associates, an alarming number of home improvement companies in the country are making less than 3% net profit after the owners are paying themselves. And that's not much margin for some of the things that are going on in there in the business right now. So great information. So a couple more bits of sponsor information, and then we got some great questions. So hang around for that. Then we're also going to give you an opportunity to let us know if you'd like to learn more about some of the sponsor stuff. But the last few sponsors here, first we got our friends at Hatch, and they help contractors grow revenue by instantly engaging new leads over texting, email, and phone. You know, from one collaborative inbox, sales teams get more appointments, automatically follow up with leads that don't buy, and nurture needs pre-sale all the way through post-sale. So what Hatch is doing is really kind of cool. You really need to check it out if you haven't. Sumo Quote, another sponsor, and one of their founders is going to be a speaker next week. And they've just put together a great system to help contractors build professional quotes that stand out from the competition and help close more deals. You know, you can build these quotes in literally minutes, and it integrates with a lot of the tools that many of you are using. So Sumo Quote is really kind of a cool thing. And EverConnect is a company on the lead generation front. It's designed to scale with consumers or customers' needs, even as they shift and change. You know, they work with all businesses of all sizes, targeting leads that align with the growth strategy of the company, so they can get the qualified leads they want, the way they want them, and when they want them. So if you haven't heard of EverConnect, you might have heard of some other brands that have kind of come together as EverConnect. So you might want to check them out and see how they can help you with lead generation. So how about we do this, a quick poll, and then we'll get to the questions. So bear with me here. I'm going to send you this poll, and you can let us know if you'd like to learn more about any of the tools that were made available with the sponsors today. Now, I'm not going to list them by sponsor. I chose to list them by type of service they provide. So which of these services would you like to learn more about? You know, we got industry-specific CRM and sales tools like MarketSharp and Prevail 360, Hatch, and so forth. Lead generation, web strategies, customer reputation tools, socials marketing, EverConnect, guild quality, and of course, Pay Simple. That's going to help you get paid on a timely basis. Roof measurement, that's the folks at RoofSnap. An estimating tool, we got a Sumo Quote there, and then of course we have DS's company, Berenson LLP, that can help you on the legal front. So if you'd like to learn more about any of this stuff, go ahead and let us know. And we'll just leave this poll up here for a second. And frankly, I'm going to leave this up a little bit while we're running through some of the questions. So go ahead and let us know if you'd like to learn more about these folks while we're doing some Q&A. So DS.
Yes.
Question. Yeah, I had understood a lot of the operational software systems covering lead paint issues. there's a lot of them. Do you have any comments about that, about these software systems that are supposed to help with lead paint compliance?
Some of them are some of them are good, Tim. I think some of them missed the boat. We've drafted forums for one or two of the associations like NAPAC out there, so I know that their stuff is good. As far as the CRMs, the problem that we're running into a lot is that a couple of them seem to require or suggest that you take pictures of the jobs on which you're performing lead safe work practices. And that is just a huge mistake, because the only thing that's going to happen if you're taking pictures of your lead safe work practice procedures and you're uploading them into CRM is that you are memorializing that you've done it wrong. I've never seen a picture of a lead safe work practice job where I can't find something that was done wrong. And we're big proponents of not taking pictures. The only exception to that would be, let's say you're up in the outskirts of Kansas, or you're out in Stanton, Virginia, or or somewhere north of Monterey, and you're working on an old farmhouse where there's lead paint chips already around the barn or something like that from the early 1900s or the 1800s. There you want to take pictures to show what the circumstances of the job site look like before you get involved in it. But otherwise, I strongly advise against taking pictures, and sometimes that's an issue with the CRMs.
All right, thanks for that. Misha, here's one for you. You talked about interest rates and so forth. Are they going to help or hurt the remodeling industry?
It's a double-edged sword, like a lot of things. So as interest rates go up, that is going to make borrowing more expensive for both you in terms of scaling your business, or for consumers in terms of financing a project. But on the other hand, it's going to lock people in to the lower rates. As interest rates go up, if you locked in a 2.8% mortgage, you don't necessarily want to go jump into a 5% mortgage. So all of a sudden, that remodel is a comparatively better deal, because you're not paying for the remodel over 30 years like you are with another project. The other thing that it does is, hopefully, if the Fed gets the process right, it will reduce some of this volatility and high inflation that we're seeing, which makes it easier for you to plan. Because inflation, as I sort of covered, if it is going up and you're not keeping pace with it exactly, you're losing money. Even if you think you're mostly keeping pace with it, you're losing money. And that's why economists call it the cruelest tax, because you really don't know how much it's hitting you. Whereas if I just come along and tax you 10%, you're going to notice it. But if I don't tell you how much I'm taxing you, you don't necessarily see how much that is pulling out of your pocket. So on that front, it will hopefully bring down that rate of inflation and make it easier for you to manage and mitigate that. But that won't necessarily happen instantaneously. So overall, net, I think higher interest rates are probably going to be more or less neutral for the industry, because I think the good and the bad will kind of cancel each other out. And more importantly, it just means that you will hopefully be able to spend a little bit more time thinking about your business, a little bit less time worrying about what inflation is going to be doing over the coming year.
All right, awesome. DS, I think this question is related to your comments on 1099 installers. And the question is, are most people that are getting in trouble with that, are the larger companies the ones that are being scrutinized on that, or can it be any size company? What have you seen that way?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's any size company. Certainly, when the IRS and the Department of Labor come calling and they see that, it's a larger company who they've seen on TV or they're getting direct mail from, and, it's a national player, they're higher on the radar screen, and the larger agencies like that. So they definitely run into more serious problems. But we're seeing Chuck and a Chuck and Bobby Bag of Donuts get hit when, especially in the more aggressive states, California, Illinois, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York. If you're in those more aggressive states and you get an installer who files for unemployment or workers' compensation because they get injured, it's very likely you're going to get a letter from the Attorney General looking to understand how you're classifying your people. Or you'll get what's called an SS8 form from the IRS, which, by the way, if anybody gets an SS8 form from the IRS, do not let your accountant fill it out. It's one of those, are you still beating your wife type of forms where you can't complete it without putting a noose around your neck. So unfortunately, it's the smaller players as well. And you know, the news guys don't report on this, but like I said, it's really a nuclear disaster. So if you've got one or two guys and you're really good friends with them and you're absolutely sure they're never coming after you, okay, I understand you're assuming the risk. But other than that, you want to be very cautious because it'll just flush you right down the toilet if you get hit with that.
All right, and Misha, might be a little bit out of your job description realm here with Angi, but the question is, what are you seeing, you know, at Angi in terms of demand requests for home improvements? Are we still seeing that on the upward swing?
Yeah, I think demand will, I'll speak about it generally just because, you know, we're a publicly traded company, so I don't want to talk about network things until there's an official season, but I will sort of pivot that over and say what's happening broadly across the economy. Demand is going to remain pretty elevated. I mean, I think the uncertainty around inflation and around war in Europe and around high gas prices, none of those things help the demand environment, but there's such a strong tailwind from this home equity effect. And because there have been so many projects that have been put off, that'll continue to be elevated for this year and next year. I'm pretty comfortable being on record of saying it's going to be a good couple of years for demand. It might slacken up a little bit, but I don't think we're going to see any sort of recession in home services. I think we're doing pretty good in terms of all the home equity that's been unlocked and how much family and household formation is taking place and how many projects have been put off. We just released some research on consumers in the fall. If you go to Angi.com/research, you can track that down. And COVID and high prices are still coming in as the number 1 and 2 reasons why people aren't completing projects. And what that means is that there's a lot of sort of put off demand because people are still sort of sitting on the sidelines. And I don't think that any of these macro things that are going to slightly diminish consumer sentiment are going to necessarily come in and noticeably hurt demand in the industry. What's important to remember when you're reading the news or other sort of think pieces about consumer sentiment is it always goes up or down every month. And if it's really elevated, it's more likely to go down than up. And so you might see a number of press reports saying, well, confidence in X, Y, or Z dropped again, but it's dropping from a pretty high place. And so I think that we'll be in a pretty healthy demand environment for the foreseeable future.
All right, good information. You know, one thing I learned, we're very fortunate here at MarketSharp because we have access to a ton of data. You know, thousands of companies, including many in this webinar, use our CRM, which gives us all sorts of aggregate data that we can look into and see what's going on. And there's no question that with the last year or so, demand was really high. I mean, inquiries were way up. Homeowners were digging around, trying to learn some things, but something very interesting happened. You know, a lot of us don't track this metric between inquiries and actual installed sales. You know, we track things like closing ratios and things such as that, which is great. But that number between inquiries and installed sales is something we should track because that really tells you your story on a conversion basis. How many of our inquiries are actually getting converted to installed sales? And something I found very interesting, in 2020, that number was 14.3% of inquiries across the board with this large group of contractors representing $3.6 billion worth of installed home improvements. That number was 14.3% of inquiries turned into net sales. In 2021, you know, inquiries were up, excitement was up. We're all running around like chickens with our head cut off trying to keep up. But guess what happened? The percent of installed sales went down to 11.9%, meaning it went down 21% from the previous year in terms of conversion. And I think the reasons why is when we get busy, sometimes we shortcut things, we don't pay attention to things, and things such as that. Never is it more important to get your business as efficient as possible when you get into a boom period and people are really inquiring about the products you sell. So sorry about that. I just found that very interesting to see how that has really reduced in the last year, even though interest is up.
It's a great, I mean, it's a really good point. And what's important for people listening to recognize is that both numbers could be up. It could be that installed sales are also up, but they're just not nowhere near as high as the inquiries. So the inquiries rose proportionally much higher. And that, you know, if that is indeed the case, I haven't seen your network data, but my suspicion is that that's the case, is that installed sales are also up, just not as much.
Yes.
And that's people putting these projects off, or or our industry potentially dropping the ball on getting the conversion. So both can happen. But even if you drop the ball on the conversion, it still means that person is out there waiting for the project to be installed.
You bet. All right, well, with that, I think we're at about 75 minutes. So I think we're ready to wind down the webinar here. Remember, I got another session next week, Tuesday for you. Going to be great stuff presented on that session as well. So be sure to join us for that. You're already registered for that. Again, we got Ryan and we got Grant that's going to present great information for us. So thanks so much for joining us. A special thanks goes out to DS and Misha for helping us out with this great information today that we can use and try to protect our business as we go forward in 2022. So take care, everybody. Bye now.
It's like actually